Um, Morning. Hi.
Morning.
I'm sat here with Dr. Beth Singler, who's a postdoctoral researcher at the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes, it's a bit of a mouthful, but yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad that right. And you're here as part of a project and doing research into artificial intelligence.
Yes, yes.
So how did you kind of come from your background in the study of kind of religions and things like that into this kind of area?
Well, we're very interested in the social aspects of the developments of technology and AI and robotics. So as a social anthropologist, I'm able to do research that involves listening to the conversations that are going on at the moment, also interviewing people, going on field work and finding out what actually are the narratives driving these developments and what kind of impacts they might have on our understanding of what it is to be human.
And listen to those conversations, which are, there's a lot of people talking about those issues.
Yeah.
Has anything kind of really come to the fore as something that leaps out as people really feel this is either uniquely human or it won't be intelligence without it?
Oh yeah, I mean the idea of creativity, human creativity, is often referred to. Although I went to an event the other night about creative AI, where we had an AI doing improv comedy, not overly successfully, but that actually made it funnier.
Right.
And people are using AI to create new Rembrandts as well. That's something else I've seen exhibited. So there is potential for some development in the arts that we've sort of claimed as a human characteristic. But I think the main debates sort of fall broadly into two camps of the very near future implications of social change through generally automation and what that's going to do to the future of work. And then the more kind of blue sky thinking of, do we reach actual intelligence at some point, and what does that mean for our future as a race? And some of that's quite dystopian and some of it's a little bit more utopian. And then you get the really far thinking of the singularity, which starts, to my mind, to sound a little bit more religious.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps we can come to that in a moment. But I think those two distinctions are seen quite separate in a lot of people's minds. Because in the short term, the interesting thing I was talking about with someone the other day is, the idea of automated home care for the elderly, which we've seen parts of the Far East seem to be kind of taking a march on, and what the ethical issues around that, the kind of human interaction issues are. So I think, obviously, this is will robots take all our jobs, which is fine. I'm not sure they take certain anthropology jobs quite yet. But there's that aspect to it. But then there's other ethical questions in the near future as well, before we get these really drastic things, and then ultimately to transhumanist singularity, revelations and things.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I mean, I think the companion bots thing is going to be increasingly important. We've got worldwide, we've got an ageing population, of course, that varies depending on different regions. And I think the Far East, Japan in particular, is leading on this because they are aware that they do not have the younger generations who are either coming up or willing, perhaps, to spend as much of their time caring for elders. And that says something a little bit about how society's changing in priorities. But as someone who also personally lives far away from their parents, that's something I'm aware of. I think this is a question we have to start asking ourselves. What's the best outcome for the individual elderly people? And perhaps it is a robotic form. There has been studies done on the positive effects of that.
I think that's probably what you're studying, is that initially it's very easy to have a very tabloid response and say, oh, it's robots because kids are lazy and it'll be awful. And we're meant to be thinking of those kind of robotic things where they're really bad at buttering toast and that kind of things. But actually, there's probably a lot more to it, and there's a lot more worth kind of studying. But it comes to kind of the far future bit you mentioned, because I think you're absolutely right to kind of identify with that sense of those who are interested in the ideas like the singularity and this kind of point of there being some, not quite end times, but end of things as we know it, or a radical shift, and that requiring something beyond what we understand now, therefore levels of faith. And so that seems to me, or it seems to you, to have a number of these features that make it sound a bit religious, spiritual, in that realm at least.
Yeah, and when the singularity is objectified, personified as a thing, a being, then it definitely gets this sort of godlike rhetoric around it. I've heard it called a capricious god, people forecasting what it's going to be like and how it might behave. So there's some interesting elements there that I'm as someone who's studied new religious movements in particular, I'm paying attention to, that in these overtly secular conversations of people who decry religion on the whole, they are still repeating patterns that we've seen for centuries when you start talking about the end times.
And is there something in that? Because absolutely capricious people see it as very kind of doom-laden and dystopian on one hand, but also there's this idea that we almost don't need to worry about certain problems because post-singularity, AI will solve them all. So it's almost like a kind of a future hope where we can't do anything about problems now, and yet at some point this thing everything will be okay, or everything will be answered. That seems very religious.
Absolutely. And there's certain groups that suggest that we should focus more on developing that kind of AI technology that can answer the questions for us rather than working on the problems that immediately face us. And there's arguments for and against that. The idea that we can create a superintelligence that fixes all the problems is sort of written into some of the plans of some of the main AI companies, and that's their aim, to create an intelligence greater than us so we don't have to fix the problems, it can fix the problems. I don't know, I mean, there's an argument for suggesting that's laziness, but it may just be a more effective, concentrated effort. I mean, there's debate on both sides of that.
It scares me quite a lot. Thinking about it,
I'm scared every day.
The decisions about superintelligence might then make when it sees how rubbish humans are.
Well, I mean, there's also there's a lot of work going into formulating plans for AI that will be benevolent or beneficial. There's just been a large conference setting out 23 proposals for how we could work towards AI that would be beneficial to humanity. So there is concern about this. I think one of the issues arises in the immediate future is when you develop an AI that's not as good as we're hoping for and works on a much simpler level without the common sense that we take for granted as human beings. And Nick Bostrom, who's written about superintelligence, talks about the paperclip problem. Or imagine it more mythologically as the genie problem of you send out an AI to do a task but it doesn't know when to stop because it has no common sense, or you haven't given it the parameters because you've not had the common sense.
Yeah, they're obvious.
Yeah.
They're not.
So Bostrom's example is that you send out the AI or robotic form to make paperclips and it just doesn't stop until everything in the universe is paperclips. And that's a worry.
Yeah, no,
that's certainly a worry.
When they've got kind of super levels of power, but the intelligence doesn't match it. Yeah. But I think, so there's kind of ethical concern that ultimately about at that level. But I think when we see AI now in the press, many of us see it in ethical context. So the thing that really has been in the press perhaps more than anything else in the last month or two, in the last year or so, is self-driving cars. Yeah. And versions of the old-fashioned trolley problem.
Yes. Yeah.
With cars where your car will kill you by driving off a bus. If it perceives there's a greater potential, are we going to develop utilitarian cars?
Well, that is a really big problem, and jokingly you can say, well, it's great because now philosophers have got a purpose and they have impact and they can make money by solving the trolley problem. That sounds great. But the biggest issue is not that we have a problem, is that automated cars are coming quicker than we have solved that problem. So, we've got automated car trials running out across America. We will have them in the UK in the next year or two. And that's not been solved. We don't have. You can stick in some basic utilitarian ethics into that, but is that the correct response? We don't know.
Yeah, I think no. If we come all this way from generations of kind of ethical thought, we end up with utilitarianism as kind of controlling all our robots, and philosophers have largely failed.
Yes. Although I'm also very cautious about anyone who starts citing science fiction as having the answers. So I hear Asimov brought up.
Yeah, you must do, I'm sure. Yeah.
3 laws of robotics, or technically 4. And the whole point about Asimov's laws of robotics is they constantly break down and cause problems, and then you have stories, you have narratives about conflict.
It's like people read the first 10 pages of the books, then they haven't seen it actually turns into disaster and war.
3 laws, that's fine, that's all we need.
Yeah, take that and go rather than 10 pages later.
The good news is the very smart people who get together at large conferences, like the one that just recently came up with 23 principles, they're not falling for the idea that we just have 3 laws or 4 laws and that's enough. So there is some serious thought being put into this.
That makes me feel slightly better, slightly more relaxed. And I imagine that over the next few years we'll be hearing a lot more about it, and there'll be an awful lot more work for ethicists and philosophers who spend time really reflecting on it.
And lawyers.
Always.
Until they're replaced. Because lawyers are relatively easy to replace over time.
Well, the idea, I think, of robot laws, I'm not sure if it might be good if it gets rid of some human laws, but the idea of robot laws being even more brutal and terrifying.
The basic grunt work of the early stage of a lawyer's career can easily be taken over by robots, unfortunately. So, that will progress upwards. And same for doctors, diagnosticians. There's work being sent to IBM Watson now that was previously done by humans. So we're seeing this creep of automation into areas that we originally thought would be human only.
Uniquely human.
Yeah.
So philosophers better move away from logic into phenomenology and things that are probably safe.
Possibly.
Okay, well thank you.
Thank you for terrifying me.